Bob Murphy Show, episode 480.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. Another crossover. This time Adam and I are talking about specifically the daycare center fraud out of Minnesota, but it's more general than that. Adam wrote a post going through some documented cases of the scope of government fraud, and it's pretty extensive. And we don't just identify these particular examples, but then we give broader commentary on why does this keep happening? I think you'll enjoy. Even if you think, oh, this is obvious stuff. Yes, but we unpack the obviousness and explain why it is such a cliche. Here you go.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
So, just chit-chatting off the dome. I don't know if you've seen all these viral ad videos for this cool daycare center up in Minnesota. It's called a Quality Leering Center. It's getting a lot of attention, which I assume it has to mean they're pretty good. I hope they're going to branch out and maybe they'll come to, places where all the rest of us can take advantage of this Quality Leering Center I keep hearing about.
Yeah, I mean, dozens of Somalians can't be wrong.
No, they can't. Especially.
Are they Somalians or Somalis?
I
need to go to the Leering Center and find out. That's exactly the kind of thing that you would leer.
I'm going to say Somalis, and I don't care if I'm right or wrong. That's my privilege as an American. So yeah, I thought today we would speak generally of fraud in government programs and use this recent, I don't know if revelation is the right word, but what's been discovered up there as far as fraud in the last handful of years, and talk about it's not just a one-off. It's happening all across the country, and this isn't just oh my goodness, people are being criminal. There are big incentive problems in these government programs, and maybe we can talk about what they are.
Yeah, and so I was pleasantly surprised. So folks, I'm sure many of you like me saw these viral videos going around about these investigations and, people digging up old quotes from Tim Waltz and whatnot. But Adam has actually written a whole post on this stuff and dug up some factoids and everything. So I was glad for you that you actually did some homework on this one.
Factoid is not like a fact, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be accurate.
I think it's a fact that's entered Earth's atmosphere.
That's right. I wrote a little article on my Substack. HeymanNature.substack.com is where you find that.
You know what's funny, just as a brief aside? I actually even used quotation marks. I said Heyman Nature Substack, and still Google was quite sure that I meant Human Nature Substack. And then it gave me, it showed me the results for that. And then it gave me the option, do you want to look for Heyman Nature Substack? Even though I had put quotation marks.
Statistically speaking, I can't even get angry with the toaster. It probably is right to do that if it wants to help the greatest number of people. Great song, King of Pop. So where should we dive in? I mean, I guess most people have to know what we're talking about. There was this enormous bunch of fraud discovered in Minneapolis mostly, but all over Minnesota. And a lot of the perpetrators were recent Somali immigrants, but not all. It's just enormous. And it hinges mostly on Medicaid-related areas, like this daycare thing and a bunch of others.
Before we forget, do you want to explain the leering thing in just case people are like, what the heck are you guys
Oh, yeah,
talking
I'm
about?
sorry. It does. You don't have to be a criminal mastermind to commit fraud in Minnesota, apparently. Most of these buildings, if the viral video that we saw or referenced as any guide, were boarded up. Nobody was in there. And one that's supposed to be like this daycare for children where you learn things is literally has a sign that says quality leering, Lering center. And you don't have to be a super sleuth to figure out that maybe something's wrong here. This is not an actual business worthy of your taxpayer funds, if anything is.
Yeah. Do you want to just
Yeah,
summarize like some of the key findings? Because
yeah. I'll
some of the
lay out a.
stats you dug up didn't shock me, but they still are,
Yeah, they're pretty
impressive.
big. Like even before this video came out, there was a sort of semi-famous Feeding Our Future nonprofit, which got caught just stealing a quarter of $1 billion. Um, and but then over the last, I think 7 or 8 years since 2018, Medicaid was billed 18 billion for programs under this Medicaid rubric. There's 7 or 8 different subsets of various charity-like things, and at least 9 billion, half of it, is fraud, based on just the initial digging into of this problem. So it may be a little bit less, but it could easily be more. And if the uh, if the counterterrorism folks are telling us the truth, some of this money even ends up going back to Somalia and funding Al Shabaab, which I'm sure is not where John Q. Public thinks his taxpayer dollars are eventually ending up. I
And
mean,
can you? Sorry, go ahead.
when you think about it, it's just really quite perverse.
Yeah, and can you clarify when you're saying it's fraud? Like, what do you mean that? Oh, they were reporting they had 40 kids enrolled and were billing for that, but they actually had 38 students. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, this is not marginal. This is entirely the whole program is just fraud. Not like we're fudging the numbers a little bit. Like people would open up businesses and give an address. Well, here's an example. Like you'd see 100 different businesses all with the same address, and then just checks coming, but there's nobody there. There's no activity going on.
Hmm.
Again, this isn't just a little bit of sloppy paperwork. This is systematic. Oh my goodness, look at this system. This is easy to exploit. Let us do that. It's really similar with how the PPP loans during COVID were exploited by people who, see an obviously exploitable program and just do it. And since it's not their money, the government officials who run programs like these just don't seem to care. They just pay the checks and collect their checks and whatever, right?
Yeah,
In fact, go ahead.
it reminded me of the thing with the multiple businesses having the same address. It reminds me back when, when Doge was doing its thing and Elon was saying some stuff about Social Security, and then, the defenders were trotted out and they were like, "Oh, this is crazy." And I was looking into some of that stuff and reading like the Inspector General reports and things, and yeah, just even their cursory analyses, they were. Well, I mean, here we've got, there's like one social security number that's tied to, 100 different jobs in 15 states. And you know what I mean? Because it was the
He's
deal
busy.
like illegal immigrants, like if they applied and I don't know if it was the illegal immigrants that knew this or it was just the employers that like were passing around social security numbers of dead people that, but were in the system though. And so like, that's how you could, like, it would go through. In other words, it wouldn't get just kicked out and say, no, that's an invalid SSN. And so anyway, but yeah, like there was certain ones that were just being used by hundreds of different people. And the idea was, well, if we're catching this easily, I mean, there must be a bunch of other ones that we're not catching that are.
For sure. And I'm glad you mentioned the immigrants because even though this is you'll watch the headlines and think, oh, gosh darn these Somalis, if we could just get rid of them, this wouldn't be a problem. But that's not true. Um, it seems to be a concentration of this specific type of an immigrant in this case. But the three biggest states in America for fraud of this type are California and Minnesota and New York. And I think the bulk of it is just, standard Americans who feel like being cheats. I don't think this is like, I could see a MAGA person just going, well, it's just another reason we need to close the border and get rid of all these illegals. That'll solve the problem. And no matter how you feel about what should be done at the border or getting rid of illegal immigrants, that will not solve the problem. The problem is endemic to the structure of government programs of this type. and don't get distracted by, what are these guys doing here funding Al-Shabaab on my dime. That's enraging, but that's not the real problem.
Yeah, and with all this stuff, it is hard to know where to focus your ire, because it's like it just keeps getting crazier. Like I said, like you could see how, like, oh yeah, Jimmy, stopped coming after, they moved out of state, and yet that daycare kept billing Medicaid for him or whatever, and no, that it's like you said, just completely fictitious. So people understand, and then it's like, well, at least they're using the money to, give soup to their grandma, and funding terrorism too. Is like how
Potato,
how you feel about
potato.
So it really is amazing.
We're all about consumer preferences, right? I mean,
yeah, and then I guess even too to say, like, well, a lot of these people were, they've been paying into the system for decades, or their parents, and well, no, some of them are just new immigrants that are coming in and have been coached as to how to game this system. So it really is incredible. And as you say, I mean, what we're going to try to do here, folks, besides just highlighting some of the absurdities, but also like to point out the structural problems here, that it somebody who's actually cared about this flow of the money and wanted to make sure it was being used for the correct purposes might notice that, oh yeah, it's going, 100 different places with the same address, and might do something to turn that off.
Yeah, you'd think. And the federal government, I mean, we're making fun of Minnesota right now, and who knows, maybe Tim Walz and other politicians, were in on it in a way. That has become a very large voting bloc, these immigrants in that state. And between that and not wanting to rock the boat, or being called a racist or something for, pointing a finger at a certain subset of people. So all sorts of reasons to think that people knew about this, and Walz and his downstream bureaucrats, doing bad things to whistleblowers just to make this, not percolate to the surface and sweep it under the rug for another year. So it's a big problem. There's misaligned incentives all over the place, for the receivers of this stuff, assuming they're not just fraudsters, as well as the bureaucrats who push the paperwork, as well as the politicians who ostensibly are supposed to oversee this kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, just to unpack some of that, for to walk through it, it's, I mean, like looking at the various people involved who have to make, who have to all come together to make this thing work. If you think about it, nobody, it's not merely that the provision of the service to some genuinely needy recipient that the public, would be glad that, oh yes, that's why we're doing this. It's not merely that that's incidental, or, you could take it or leave it. It actually, it'd be better for every other part of the program if they didn't solve the problem. In other words, like, that would be the one thing that would spell the end of all of this activity and everything going through and justifying everything, is if actually you did such a good job that the public realized, like, no, they're really, no, everybody who needs daycare can afford it. We're good. Thanks. Or like, no more homeless people. I haven't seen a homeless person in 2 years. So we can cut this, trillion, multi-billion-dollar budget to help the homeless and close these soup kitchens. I literally don't see any like that. That would actually be. So again, it's this perverse thing where it's the opposite. Just as an analogy, when I talk about like privatizing the FAA and stuff like that, and people are like, "What, are you out of your mind?" And I just said, "Well, hey, hang on. What? Right now, if there's a plane crash, what happens? Do politicians and bureaucrats come out and say we need to cut the budget of the FAA and we have to like fire half the inspectors? No. Obviously, everyone says we're understaffed. We need more money. And who's gonna be stingy at a time like that when a plane just crashed? And so it doesn't mean that the people working for the FAA, go to bed at night just thinking, how can I engineer a plane crash to boost my 401k, or I guess it'd be a 403b or something. I don't know what they do, but the point is that the incentives are all backwards. Like, so you really are just relying on their, good intentions or whatever, their humanity. They actually do, many of the people involved get, maybe like a guy at the top might have to get fired or something if there's a really egregious scandal, just, for appearance's sake. But all the people involved, like, who just keep the thing going year in and year out when you're trying to understand, like, how come somebody doesn't speak out, or the few people that do try to say, hey, this is kind of screwy. Everybody else tells them to shut up and, deals with them. It's because there's a huge flow of money. And, that's, again, solving the actual problem might jeopardize that. And so far from them all having an interest in curing it, they don't want to. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, briefly, because somebody might hear you say that and say, I guess, but why would it be better privatizing these charitable organizations? Because you get the same problem. Imagine a huge homeless soup kitchen private enterprise. They don't want to lose their jobs either. So don't they have the same negative incentive to not actually solve the homelessness problem? And the difference, of course, is they don't get to tax us for their money. If it's private, you have to actually demonstrate that your effectiveness to people who are voluntarily handing your money. And there's going to be, they're going to demand auditing and surveillance, make sure the program isn't being run horribly and haphazardly or detrimentally to the purpose of the cause. You can't do any of that in an organization run by politicians. You get to vote every 2 to 4 years, and good luck actually seeing what's going on, and then the layers of bureaucracy and yeah, private is always better. The incentives, they can't be perfect, but they're much better aligned.
Right. And just to elaborate on that a bit, because part of the issue is if they come up with a way to save funds, they can be deployed somewhere else, right? So like if it's a church or something, and the people give, they tithe and whatever and give donations for certain causes or whatnot. And, and they could, when I was in Chicago, there was the church I went to during the winter, especially like there were a few occasions where they were, the news was warning like, oh, wow, it's going to be really cold tonight. And, you want to stay in or whatever. And we opened up our doors for homeless people to come in. And, I volunteered one of the things to just, playing cards with guys and stuff. But you could see the people there and know that, well, geez, if there's just some guy that is just hanging around and there's nothing really wrong with him. And he's just, and like you could just tell that because it's the church's resources and you could be doing something else with that money. Whereas you're saying, if there's some mid-level bureaucrat involved with the distribution of federal funds and allocating it to different things or whatever, they don't have any discretion. And where this was really driven home for me was in Mises' book on bureaucracy, where he explained, why is it that government agencies are so bureaucratic? And it's just, like the stereotype and, you just people, paper pushers filling out forms and stuff, and they're just doing stuff that's crazy. Whereas like the private sector, even for big companies, they tend to be like lean and mean, and they can, get the job done or whatever. And if something doesn't work, notwithstanding Dilbert cartoons, like ultimately, something will happen and they'll, close that division down or whatever. And he was saying it's because in the private sector, there's a profit and loss test. And he says, whereas you wouldn't want that in the government thing. So like you wouldn't want the fire chief to, to get his budget from the mayor and then to say, well, you know what, how about these neighborhoods over here? If there's a fire, we just won't go there. And then we'll give ourselves, a bonus. How about that? Like, you don't, or we're not going to do fire truck service on Sunday. We don't think that's efficient. Right. And so you wouldn't want that person making those decisions, even though decisions like that do have to be made. Like I'm kind of exaggerating, but the point, because again, plus it's not their money. Right. And so that's part of the issue. And that's why you get all these crazy outcomes with government, like defense contractors getting these, crazy packages and whatnot. It's because the politicians who approve that stuff, they can't, if they found some other vendor who would be willing to do the same stuff for 10% less, it's not that, why don't we go with this guy? And then that's 10% left for the company in terms of retained earnings. And that goes to the shareholder. Like, no, that would be theft or something. You can't do that. That would be embezzlement of government funds if the people like at the Pentagon or whatever were slashing spending and then putting it into their own bank accounts. So I got Mises. My point here is Mises was explaining why with government programs and government officials, they can't do that kind of stuff because it would lead to too much corruption. And again, what's fundamentally driving it is because they raise their revenue involuntarily, and in many cases they have a monopoly on the provision of that service. And so you get those two things together. You don't want the people in charge of providing that to have discretion. You need to lay out step by step. This is how you do your job. This is what it means if you did it properly. This is what it means if you didn't, because you really got to keep those people on a tight leash because they have so much arbitrary power otherwise. Whereas again, if everything's voluntary, yeah, let the company do what they want, and they can, if you want to, Chick-fil-A who doesn't want to be open on Sunday, they can do that, see if it works, okay, fine. So that's part of the issue in terms of why Mises said that stuff in the private sector isn't as bureaucratic. And again, people care about their money because it's either their money or like the shareholders are ultimately in charge of hiring people and coming up with the plan and the personnel and, periodically checking in. It's ultimately their money on the line. And so they care about it. Whereas again, if there's $18 billion in fraud in Medicare or something, it's not that anybody involved with any decision anywhere near that is poorer because of that waste. In fact, many of them are currying favor with powerful people so that when they leave office, they can go get a nice, consulting job or something. So like that's partly how the system works, is they give people, plush deals while they have the authority to do so. And then when they're out of power, somebody scratches their back in return.
Yeah, all great points, Bob. One quick one I want to make. When the flashpoint for this thing up in Minnesota centered around daycare, I couldn't help thinking just how perverse it is. I mean, people have a real problem in this country. Problems stemming from all the overregulation and the fiat dollar and taxation and blah, blah, blah. But more specifically focused, childcare is a huge expense, such that you have to have a government program under Medicaid funded by the feds and administered to the state so that they can help people just find a way to, got to have two jobs because we're getting taxed to death and inflated our money away. So, okay, what are you going to do with these kids? Well, the first thing they did to make this a huge problem is via regulation, eliminate all the cheap alternatives for daycare that I went through when I was a kid. Maybe you did too, but it used to be that you could throw your neighbor a few bucks and she could just take care of a few kids in the neighborhood because she happened to be at home. And that's illegal now. You just can't do it. And if you say, oh, all you got to do is get licensed, you can do it. No, go try. It is give those smallies credit. They jumped through all the right hoops, at least bureaucratically. They didn't actually open up the buildings and premises, apparently. But it's that old adage, the government breaks your leg and hands you a crutch and says, see, where would you be without us? So that's one thing. But then I wanted to, do you want to spend a little moment talking about kind of the knowledge problem and the proper size of charity? Because, we all have empathy in our heart and we don't want to help people, but we don't want to do it ourselves. And when we're lazy and a little bit evil, we let the government do it. But even when we're sensible and know that these things should be done privately, I think it's wiser to not pick a huge organization, but keep it a little bit closer to home. Like you were talking about churches, that's famously about the right level, because you don't want to be this huge gulf, either in bureaucracy or space between the people wanting to help and delivering the care and the end user, because malingering is a thing, and fraud on a small scale is a thing. And how do you make sure that what the program is doing is trying to improve these people's lives rather than just letting them slip into the dependence in a very, very sad way? So as size, does Hayek have something to say here about the knowledge problem or the administrative problem or anything like that?
Yeah, I think so. You made a few good points there. So I wrote down knowledge problem. If I, for some reason, don't hit that, remind me.
You got it.
Okay. But yeah, just to elaborate what you were saying about the the unregulated daycare and whatnot, that happened literally to me. That was with my oldest son. when we lived in Nashville, and there was a brief period where, because like his mom was going to school or something, and I'm always working. And so there was just periods where like I would have him for 6 hours, and it was like I could kind of do some of the work with him, but especially if I timed it around his nap or something. I'm talking when he was like 2 or 3 or something, but it was just too much. And so it was like, if I could really just go dump him somewhere for 3 hours, that's all I need. And then I could get some work, you know what I mean? Like it was strategic like that. Cause I didn't have it wasn't like I had to go into the office from 8 to 5 or something, I was working quote from home, but I had an office. But anyway, and there was this place that was perfect. I forget what they called it. It was a cute name. It was like, stay and play or something like that. And I mean, it was a glorified, it was like, yeah, like if there was like 3 adults there, it depended on the time of day. Like they staffed up or whatever based on when they thought. And there were, I don't know, 10 kids there at any given time. It would ebb and flow, and people would just go in there and drop your kid off. And you had to, the first time, they'd fill out forms and sign consent and whatever and all that stuff. But, once you were a regular there, they would just show up. Oh, okay. Hey. And, your kid would get in there, and how long do you think he's going to stay? Okay. You sign it in and everything. And they just had like a bunch of TVs and, Segas and whatever, the gaming systems were back then, and kids playing games and doing stuff. And they had, other kind of little toys for, the smaller kids. And they had, people there who could change diapers, and they had all that stuff. And it was all just right there, and that it was perfect. So yeah, it's not like you'd get Parent of the Year award if you dropped your kid off 20 hours a week there, but for strategic, surgical strikes kind of thing where I got to drop my kid somewhere for 3 hours and my regular babysitter's not set up. And it was great. And I used the thing all the time. And then they closed their doors one day, and I asked, what was happening. And they were like, oh yeah, the state shut us down because we exceeded the threshold. Like you had to be below a certain amount. Otherwise, you had to go through all these, get all these certifications and whatnot. But where they were located, like the rent there, it just wouldn't have worked. You know what I mean? Like if they only had the number of kids capped at what it had to be for you to not have to go get all the extra whatever qualifications, it just, so like some lady, yeah, like if some lady's going to watch 2 kids in her living room or something, she could do that and still fly under the radar. But, once you got above a certain size, so you understand why those rules are there. And I get it how, well, in this day and age in modern America, we have standards by God, and blah, blah, blah. But in practice, that just totally, now it meant I had to have my kid around me, when I'm dragging him to work or something, and he had to sit miserable, while I'm, when I was watching the back of my head doing work or something instead of playing with a bunch of other kids. So that's the kind of, and then when I moved to Massachusetts, again, that was Tennessee, 20 years ago at this, or 18 years ago. And then now more recently with my middle son in Massachusetts, more recently trying that. And I was calling around trying to find a place like that. And I was describing it to various places, and they were just like laughing at me, like, what the hell? What do you want a horse with a horn out of its head? What are you talking about? No, it's not a place like that. And I was like, I could just come in and, drop my kid off for a few hours and just come back. And they're like, do you mean daycare? And I went, well, you call it whatever you want. And they were like, no, you have to enroll, and then you're going to drop them off, and it's got to be this many hours a week, and it's going to be this many thousands of dollars, prepaid, blah, 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 And it was just ridiculously expensive. It was kind of like an all or nothing thing. There was no hybrid, like, yeah, just kind of an informal thing. I just show up and plop the kid down for a few hours and I'll come back and get him. And no. And so what we ended up doing was finding somebody like via, it wasn't Craigslist, but it was like some, something like that was more for childcare. And, hired this lady. It was fine, but it was like I had to just find this lady who was a stay-at-home mom and just hire her. And it was way more per hour than would have been the case, in some other place because of economies of scale. And so anyway, so it wasn't devastating to me because fortunately that period, like my income was awesome for that stretch. Like it's crazy how much I ended up paying. But I mean, somebody who, didn't have that, like I don't know what we would have done, but I'm just, so it wasn't that those paternalistic regulations were helping us. That's for sure.
Well, they were making rich people and politicians feel better. Who cares that the rest of us just have the legs cut out from under us? Bob, before we continue, I want to have a completely natural, totally spontaneous discussion about how awesome the new Scott Horton Academy is and why everybody listening should go to scotthortonacademy.com/crossover and immediately sign up for it.
Exactly, folks. I knew I was going to like it. After all, I've liked Scott. I've interviewed him on my show several times. I've seen him on long form interviews like on Tucker Carlson. And I just thought, oh, this will just be like that, but more so. And it is that, but it's even better. Just to give you an example, like Scott goes through a presentation and he's got multimedia. Like you can see the video of Saddam Hussein calling off names and having people taken out back. And I don't think they were given a retirement package. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't speak the language, but it didn't look too good for them. And lots of stuff like clips of Jimmy Carter praising the Shah of Iran, just all kinds of stuff like that, really helping you to understand how the heck did we get into this mess. And so I know it sounds like I'm just saying this for the ad, but it really is true that I'm not going to watch a movie or something later on. I'm going to get back to listen to Scott explain what the heck happened with U.S. foreign policy. So I can't recommend it enough.
Awesome. And remember, folks, go to scotthortonacademy.com/crossover and you will get a great discount, and Bob and I will get a kickback, so you will be supporting these crossover episodes. I am now officially reminding you about the knowledge problem.
Right. So just for people who aren't familiar with that, so the Austrian economics critique of socialism, famously originally Ludwig von Mises, he leveled what's called the calculation argument or problem against socialism to say, the central planners, even if they had all the information at their disposal and they had nothing but the best of intentions for their subjects, still, if they engage in outright socialism, they own the means of production, you don't have genuine market prices for the factors of, like land and the factories and things like that, and rubber and tin. If you don't have prices, you can't tell ex post if you're making an efficient use of society's resources, right? So that's the calculation problem, that you can't, basically compare inputs and outputs. You have no metric to use if you don't have market prices. And then Hayek, so like the socialists responded, and then Hayek joined the battle, and he made what I think is an important but a distinct point that we end up labeling the knowledge problem. And he was kind of like even stressing like how Mises was conceding so much that really in the real world, that the people in power, they just, even if you assume they are trying to help, they don't have enough information, that there's all sorts of facts on the ground that individuals know that you couldn't communicate up to the central planners, and just the possibility of experimenting with different techniques and things. Like maybe there's different ways that you might try to help the homeless. And so if the people in charge just say, this is the way we're going to do it, we're going to tax everybody, we're going to take $1 billion a year out of the property taxes, and this is what we're going to fund these programs, do it this way, that besides, even if they weren't corrupt, and even if they really were trying to help homeless people, maybe they don't have the right approach. Maybe there's some other people that have better ideas, but they just can't convince people, or they don't have the mechanism to even communicate that to the people at top. So that's, that issue is always at play. And so that's one of the virtues of the decentralized market economy, is you've got all this dispersed knowledge, and the market system through prices and, open entry and entrepreneurship gives people like, hey, if you have got a good idea, all you got to do is convince one investor to go along with it, and you can try it and see. It's not that you need to, pass it up the chain of command and get a group of central officials to, sign off on it.
Yeah, for sure. And then, no matter how it's structured, you want your administrators to be hands-on, because let's get into this. Not every person who needs something needs the same thing. Like some people need, food, medicine, money to get by. Some people need a hug. Some people need a swift kick in the rear. You really want, so it's weird to just have a too bureaucratized methodology where this is what we do. Here's a cod and here's some soup, and we trying to convert everybody to Christianity, and that better work on everybody because that's what we got. I think you want to be a little bit more flexible, because all of us aren't the same. Um,
Can I
yeah,
give an example, like with
yeah,
the daycare? To return to that one. So I don't know exactly what the regulations were, but I imagine, to go back to the place that got shut down. I'm assuming it'd be stuff like, oh, to work in this, you have to have a background check, and yeah, somebody convicted of whatever things you can imagine isn't eligible. And I think most people say, yeah, that's pretty, but other stuff like, oh, do they have to be all trained in first aid or something? And you might say, well, maybe it's enough if just one of the adults, on site is trained in that. Like, what are the chances that three of the kids are going to be choking simultaneously? It's
and
things
it
like that.
can't be your house. It has to be a separate facility. And oh my God, how much more expensive does that require to
Right,
make it?
right. And so with all these things, and you can say, well, no, but it would be good to have that. And right, just like Friedman did a good job in one of his books. I think it was Free to Choose, where he was just saying, yeah, if the government, they could pass all kinds of regulations on like requirements for a new car.
Yeah,
And if you end up insisting that everyone's driving a Cadillac, that would be good, except, oh, now it's really expensive. And so a lot of people have to take the bus. So nobody's denying that, a new Cadillac is a better vehicle than, some other junk car. But the point is it's more expensive. And so likewise here, right. Other things equal, I would want all of my daycare workers to be
yeah.
trained in infant CPR and all this stuff, and to speak 9 languages. And that, no, like, we don't let the kids play video games. We sit there and we, build Legos and things like, but it's more expensive. And so then that's the issue. If it's $30 an hour to drop your kid off there, some people might just say, well, I want to keep them home with me. And then they're, being neglected or whatever, or it might be even more dangerous if the parents
Sure.
doing whatever, takes them to their job and has them sitting in the bouncy seat or something while they're washing dishes or who knows what.
Or on the 14th floor of the I-beam as the high rise is getting
Yeah.
constructed.
So
Yeah,
that's the
go
point. So like, to tie it back to the knowledge problem, the issue is that, like, to not know what those trade-offs are, but even if they did, like, to be aware of the trade, but to not know, well, geez, for the community, which is the right one. And the point is, framing it that way, maybe there is no answer. Like, it's not that there is a right one. Maybe you have different daycares and have different price points, and the more affluent families, take their kids to the ones where, they got the Mary Poppins lady who's teaching their kid Latin, and the other ones, it's like, yeah, we make sure there's no knives lying around, and yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that's all you can have. I want to get to the perverse incentives of most of these government welfare systems. But before we get there, do you have any opinion on the negative psychological effects on the helpee, the recipient of all this stuff, just from the entitlement mindset that is just such a big part of our culture now?
Well, yeah, and it's, I've read stuff on this, and it certainly seems true to me that they're saying there was this fundamental transformation in the 20th century. I don't know enough to give like start and end dates, but that, yeah, it used to be like, people, like, they would call it the dole or something, and, charity. And there was a certain stigma attached to it. It was the kind of thing where, yeah, you're down on your luck. Yeah, you can go get these handouts and whatever to get back on your feet. But I mean, it was expected, like, you weren't proud of it, and, you wanted to get off of it as soon as you could. And then over time they transformed that, and they like, so, oh, no, that's not these people, they're entitled to, they deserve this. There's like government formulas. No, I qualify, and I'm entitled to the, and that, the thinking you're doing them a favor by taking the shame out of it and whatever,
Yeah,
you're
that's
actually
it's not good.
that. No, because now, again, like, the people providing the services that just view it more as like, they're working in the DMV, and okay, next. Okay. And then you're my, caseload, and this is our budget set by how many people, and they're not trying to actually solve the problem. And then the recipients too just think, well, yeah, I'm entitled to this, the way our rules are, and this is our system. And so it's not that, like, once it becomes normal. I mean, I saw a thing, I was at Walmart, this is a while, it was like 2 years ago or something. And it was the main cashier, and then the girl helping her bag, and they were, I don't know, like 23 or something. And they were just chit-chatting, like, while they're ringing me out and bagging my stuff. And I don't remember but they were like strategizing about like all the different programs they were eligible for. You know what I mean? Like, and just saying, oh, well, see, what we do is no. What you got to do is to go with this, and then they get, they pay for this, and then you go do this, and it's like, oh, okay. And it was just like matter of fact, that, and they presumably had full time jobs too. So
Yeah, at least there's a bright side. They were working. Yeah, I don't think it's too hyperbolic that the phrase becoming trapped in a cycle of poverty. I think the lack of the stigma is a big part of that. Obviously, we're about to get into some of the horrible economic incentives that people that are on these programs face. But I do think just there's something to changing your mindset from, yeah, this is not how it should be, to, well, yeah, we should all be smart and use all these government programs. I think it's not just like the blatant fraud isn't the worst of it. It's we're just lowering people's expectations of what they should be aiming for. Like the fiat money is a big part of this too.
Mhm.
Like I totally understand why people have a high time preference in a world where it just looks like the powers that be are trying to keep us down, and if we ever get anything resembling money in the bank, the value of it gets inflated away.
Well, I remember in like late 2008, maybe it was early 2009, that there were like car ads and stuff saying, "Come get your bailout down at
right,
Crazy John's or whatever," and it was.
right.
And I just remember like recoil. Like, I mean, I get why it was funny and an effective ad or whatever, but I was just thinking this is not good. Like, it just, you say, like, people just getting the idea that this isn't real. This is all like casino chips or something, and that, like, I know people might think this is like a Paul Krugman or somebody would scoff, but like when you're holding genuine like silver coins and they just have some heft to them,
Yeah,
like I really think that would just make people behave differently.
of course it would.
And
Before we move on
Yeah.
from that horrible period, I spent months depressed when the government was paying people to literally take a useful economic asset, their used car, and pour cement in the engine block or whatever, just demolish it, get rid of
the
it.
cash for
Cash for
clunkers.
clunkers made me so offended just because of the economic destruction. Broke my heart.
Yeah. Before we forget, because you touched on some good stuff there. Let me just unpack a bit the perversity of it. Yeah. Besides, again, just like the normalization of, like I said, like the reason with those girls talking at the Walmart, the reason that just struck me was just how, commonplace it was. Like it was just known. Like, oh yeah, what you do, like when you spill, coffee on your shirt, let me show you this trick to get it out. Like that's the way they were. Oh, you apply for this. Oh, you can get an extra $100 a month that way. Don't you understand? And so, the trap that ends up happening is when you have these means tested assistance programs, which, prima facie makes sense, right? Like, okay, we're going to have the government subsidize certain people, make transfer payments. We're not just going to give it to everybody because that'd be too expensive. So we just want to help the people in need. So yeah, a certain income level, you get this. And then, it phases out over time. And the problem with that is, among other things, you can make a moral argument or something in terms of rights and property. But I mean, just even in terms of the incentives and the perverse unintended consequences, or perhaps intended, is that for some people, especially, like Casey Mulligan is a guy who really did a lot of analysis on this. He's out of Chicago. It was after Obamacare got implemented, and he went through and ran the numbers, and he was showing how, like, he would take up various hypothetical, like a single mother household who gets this, and so she qualifies for the subsidies under Obamacare, and she qualifies for WIC and this and that, food stamps and all these other things, housing assistance. And he was just showing how, given all the programs and everything, all that she was getting, it was like, I'm making these numbers up, but there were certain ranges where she had more than 100% marginal income tax rate, meaning like if she, if she was working, if she got more hours, or if she got a better job that paid more, there was a certain thing where, yeah, if her pre-tax income went up by $10,000 all in, she would end up having $11,000 less when all was said and done, because she would lose more, that much in her benefits. And so
It's still it's still an economic ladder, just like you remember from the good old days. It's just the bottom rung is complete and utter dependence on the welfare state. And then the next rung is like CEO. It's just all the
Yeah.
other stuff. It's hard to, you have to jump a little bit to get to that next rung.
Yeah. And like you were saying, Adam, I mean, it's like how insidious it is, if you think back, back when it was relatively laissez-faire, and then step by step, like, oh yeah, increase the tax burden and inflation so that, the mother has to work too now. And then you got to put the kids in there, increase all that stuff. So that it's got to be very uniform and, oh yeah, we got to have your kid for, 30 hours a week at least. Otherwise you can't do it. And this, and have all these, in terms of, if there were a devil trying to destroy the family and, just destroy and ruin anybody's ability to escape from the class into which they were born, this is a pretty good system. Like, that's what he would design. So
Screw tape letters. I guess I want to hit what's wrong with the structural system of government programs for as many different angles as I can think of. I think we sort of glossed over the things that lead, all the various perverse incentives that lead things to go wrong. Then I lost my list of what they are. Do any pop to the top of your brain? I mean, there's just something about, everybody wants their fiefdom to become more feathered and grow. If you're any kind of a middle level bureaucrat managing a government welfare, or it doesn't have to be money, even just any of these programs, daycare, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ever want anything to get better for these people, because you're therefore less important. You administer a smaller budget, and that's just a horrible way for these things to be run.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't necessarily, I mean, it's tied to government, but like I remember reading about like the leaders like Jesse Jackson, like the leaders of these civil rights organizations, and how, the further back in time you could say, oh yeah, they were protesting genuine, and you could see why the NAACP and all these things were, but then over time it was like the stuff they were complaining about got less and less egregious, and so likewise, yes, if you're in charge of, dealing with I don't know, geez, kids need computer access in the schools. And then once it gets to the point where, yeah, every kid's got his own laptop or something, it's like, what the heck more are you going to do? And yet it's not that they're going to cut that. There's always going to come up with new things. So it's when you're in charge of that, again, like you say, your incentive is to maximize it.
I don't know if it ever gets to the point where every kid gets a laptop, because so much of it just literally gets siphoned off. Like, I was doing some research. I think we already covered just how much money got stolen from all the COVID relief efforts. Just huge. Trillions of dollars a year in whatever they were calling it, unemployment benefits or something. But then the USDA estimates that $12 billion a year vanishes just from SNAP food assistance. Money to feed kids. That much just being siphoned off into fraud. I find it hard to believe that even what percentage of people that this is aimed at helping is it even reaching. And the Affordable Care Act was still is another huge center for fraud. People who are fake brokers or unreliable, crooked brokers, they can get over $2,000 a month off of Obamacare, faking the subsidies. And I know from personal experience that people aren't, whoever designed that system, the money isn't even getting to those that are ostensibly meant to be helped, because it's just so much of it is being pilfered off the top.
Yeah. So it's a great point, and right, that I have known various people over the year, like, elderly people who are living in like rent subsidized buildings and things. And you're right. For the billions and billions that are flowing through, it's not like the end recipients are all, living high on the hog or something. Like it really is. And that's why I was, making the reference to the devil before, and saying in terms of this insidious system that it seems like it's the worst of all possible worlds, where, yeah, the taxpayers are being ripped off for boatloads of money. And yet it's not even that, oh, well, at least they're just, taking it from the top 1% and they're giving it to the bottom 10%. And at least the bottom 10% now are, they're driving Mercedes, and maybe we shouldn't be, maybe it should be just a regular car, But at least, no, they're not driving Mercedes from this. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's like they're doing, we'll put it this way, in order for the system to work, they do need to have, the problem to point to. So just like we were saying, if you're in charge of like coming up with money, programs to help fight homelessness, you need homeless people to still be around. Like you can't actually help them. And yeah, if you're coming up with rent subsidies or something and you're the one doling out contracts to build, construction crews that are building apartments that are rent controlled and things like you need people to not be able to afford the market rent. So you got to keep them on the edge so they keep their dependency there. So it really is just a wicked system.
Yeah, they get you coming.
And I don't mean wicked like Brad, man. It's wicked. That's not what I mean.
No, wicked like Satan. It really does apply. These are just evil programs. And it makes you wonder, is the fraud a feature? Because, the 18 trillion or 18 billion was being, again, billed to Medicaid from Minnesota for these programs. And at least half of it was fraud. Well, maybe if half of it wasn't fraud, then we wouldn't be able to point to people that actually need this thing. Maybe some of these problems would clear up. Not that I think government can solve problems, but having literally half the money stolen, that can't help.
Right.
Do you want to, let's say we all could snap our fingers and eliminate all these programs, maybe not overnight, but in a year. What would the world, how would it operate if we are actually scratching our empathetic itch through voluntary means rather than relying on these horrible coercive taxation funded abominations that do nobody any good?
Well, yeah, let me first just make one more point about the government approach, and then we'll try to show why the market-based voluntary approach, I think, avoids that double whammy. So it goes back, if people remember, Adam, when you and I went through that Arthur Laffer video. Mm-hmm. This was a point he made when I worked for him. On the one hand, it seems pretty straightforward, but it's pretty amazing when you just think through the logic of it. He was saying that no, a transfer program, just by its very nature, clearly reduces total economic output. Because look at both legs of it. That on the one hand, it for people who generate income, they get to keep less of it because it's got to be funded from somehow. So you got to take from the people that produce, take some of what they produce to fund these programs. And then if it's means tested, it, subsidizes people for working less, right? In other words, so if you're earning above average income, some of it gets taken away. If you're earning below average income or not earning income at all, you get subsidized. And so he's saying both ends of that, that's, it's taking away the incentive to work more on both ends of it. Right. And so
would you say
you're getting,
would you say the biggest piece of that first leg is just the diminished capital accumulation that comes through taxing, that end of it?
Possibly. It'd be hard to, because again, a lot of this stuff, it's like the incentives, because this stuff is on the margin.
I see. The incentive to actually work more hours and produce more.
So it's
as opposed to leisure. Yeah.
And it's, again, it depends. You'd have to get more specific about it, but it's a kind of like, someone who has the ability to earn $1 million, and if he faces a 50% marginal tax rate,
gotcha.
He's not going to be a librarian probably, but he might not put in 90-hour work weeks or something to become partner at the law firm. There's
Gotcha.
various things. But you're right. Especially to the extent that, which is why income taxes in particular, a lot of economists think are really crippling, is that, part of what typically gets rolled into that is realized capital gains and like dividends and interest. And so it's directly penalizing saving. So it's like, yeah, you earn your income, you pay the tax on it. And then if you just consume it, then you're fine. Whereas if you invest it, then, instead of earning 10%, you technically only earn 9% if there's a 10%, or if instead of earning 10%, you only earn 5%. So it's like deadening the return to saving. And so, you don't be surprised when the saving rate is so low. So yeah, in terms of crippling long run growth, putting this huge wedge between what people save and what they get from that, is particularly devastating. So there's that element, and that's partly why like these UBI proposals, if you start getting realistic, like they're just like how the heck can that work? I mean, I suppose if the robots are making everything, it possibly, but just in in normal terms, it's like no, because the more generous you are, it's not just people getting paid $30,000 a year to do nothing. That's probably going to work a lot less, but also the more people doing that, then that means the more you got to take out of the people that make $200,000 a year or more to fund that. And then after a while, it's like, who the heck is going to be wanting to make $200,000 a year when, so anyway, there's that kind of weird, getting behind the 8 ball situation.
Yeah. Not a lot of math majors making those proposals.
So, so you say, okay, well, what's so magic about, the government doing that? Like, it's still, okay, you got your voluntary soup kitchens and stuff like that. So doesn't that mean, why do I want to go work more? Well, no, because again, it's voluntary. Right. So it's actually the other way around where
Right.
like yeah, I can go out and if I, do well and I start a company or whatever, and I become a multimillionaire, and partly why I might want to do that is because I can say, I could do a lot to really help the homeless in my situation. Like, yeah, I can give this guy $1 or whatever. I can go buy him some soup. But if I go out and, and really apply myself and my company goes big and it goes public and I sell and I make a $10 million windfall, I might, take $500,000 and really try to set up some center and do something for these, give them some job skills or, whatever.
Especially if the government isn't around to make it illegal what you're doing. You don't have the right
Right.
license to feed these people, or the building you set up, isn't the way they want it to be.
Yeah. So, and also too, like with the encouragement of, I think a lot of people, they don't so much resent giving up some of their income to help genuinely needy people. But when they read these stories, they know that's not how they're using my money.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I really do think it flips it that
Of course.
far from, in other words, voluntary charity does not reduce the incentive of people to go earn more money. Right. Because if it were, they just wouldn't donate. You know what I mean? If you're the kind of person that say, yeah, I would be willing to go earn $500,000 a year, but I don't want to have to give 10% to those homeless people. Well, in a voluntary free society, they wouldn't have to. So you're not losing out on anybody's effort because, oh, geez, I don't want to have to give some to these people. You know what I mean? It's all voluntary. And like I said, it's possibly the other way around. That knowing I get to choose and I can see the efficacy of what I'm doing and know it's not being wasted, then that might actually, make people work even harder because they know they're going to get that extra dopamine hit. And it could even be for not noble reasons, like they want to be the guy that's shaking the hand of somebody as they open up the new
Sure.
the new stage or something where the community theater can put on their shows or whatever. Okay, but still that they're going to go out and be a successful business person and make that charitable donation.
Yeah, I don't mind harnessing people's egomania and narcissism if good things happen because of it. That's just fine. Do you have anything more to say on this subject, or can I start asking you weird questions?
You can start asking me weird questions.
So, so I hear Tim Walz is going to gather together the National Guard there and send them up against ICE. So I guess we're getting our next secessionist movement. Who are you betting on?
This whole thing is nutty, and just how like roles are getting reversed and things. It is interesting. So I'll say this again. I've done a lot to give a qualified defense of like Dave Smith's views on closing the border and things like that. So it's not that I'm just reflexively anti-immigration or something, but if you were trying to discredit, deporting people, what better job could you be doing?
It's so bizarre.
Or what's even worse is if you were trying to get half of the country to be okay with masked guys going around grabbing people, demanding their papers, and just disappearing them into vans and shooting them in the head if they get in their way, you would do this. So either way.
It's like they're having, a Job-like bet. The people who actually pull the strings, Soros or whoever's like, hey, I bet I can get all of my guys to think the following. Oh, yeah, well, I'll tell you what I can get my guys to believe. I'm horrified. I think the people who are funding it have sort of a Saul Alinsky view of how to handle, opposing Trump or whatever. I think they're rooting for violence. I think they want it to get bloody. I'm afraid it will. And then what happens in a response to that is going to be chaos. I mean, I was joking about the secession thing, um, but you almost wonder. Like I think you would agree with me, but I think too much political power is centralized in Washington. This isn't a republic of 50 states or anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to find a silver lining. Is this maybe the sort of thing that could make people value decentralization politically again? Maybe. I don't know.
How does this sound to you? I had read somebody, don't know if this is true. One person said something like, how come Biden was able to deport so many people, and it was so under the radar that nobody, or maybe it was Obama. It was some Democrat, because now that I'm thinking about it, like it wasn't Biden the one that let him in. But in any event, like a lot of deportations happened under, it was either Obama or Biden. And they're saying it like it was such little fanfare that like we don't even know that, a lot of people don't even know that happened. And now like there's all this, and the response from somebody who didn't strike me as like being reflexively pro-Trump, but they were just kind of being it was saying, oh, because back then, like the local, the blue state and local officials worked with the federal, the Democratic administration's immigration officers to go ahead and they cooperated, and yeah, these guys, okay, fair enough. And whereas here it's, very adversarial. And so that's partly why this is happening. And I suppose they would say, like when you say, how come these guys are wearing masks and going around? And they'd probably say, well, because these nut jobs would, dox them. And then, somebody would do something like egg their house or worse. And so that's why they got to remain, and, and I can't say they're wrong. Like, I would understand why they would want to be, keep their identity secret. So in any event, with all this stuff, it's like, yeah, you understand from each person's narrow point of view and each side, like why they're doing what they're doing. But on the other hand, it's like, yes, and this is clearly how we end up, under martial law. And
I think you're exactly right. I can steel man both sides' opinion. I don't share either one, but it makes sense. Again, that's why I wonder if the quote unquote powers that be just aren't screwing with us or something. It reminds me of our conversation / debate with Jacob Hornberger. Because I said, I don't think his position that all 8 billion people can come here and camp out in Central Park or whatever, I don't think that's right. But I sure don't want to see a militarized border, because I know what that looks like, and it hurts the citizenry far more than they get helped by whatever benefits you get by keeping what percentage out. And I sure as heck don't support what ICE is doing. I think what you said about the numbers is a little bit true. I think Trump made some crazy promise about how many he was going to kick out, and there was just going to be the worst of the worst. But I think the numbers under Biden, Obama were big, and he couldn't fetch his number. And part of that, I think, is accounting and like what you counted as a deportation. Maybe they let him in first and then kicked him out. And as you said, blue cities would obviously help out an ICE agent under Obama more than they will under Trump. But yeah, what's happening, the way ICE is behaving is just terrible. And it's like you said, I can't believe that they're not doing it to try and get more people to hate ICE. I mean, why in the world are they behaving this way? It's terrible. Have you given officially your opinion on the shooting of Renee Good?
I mean, I wish it hadn't happened. It's what I said on Twitter, because somebody was lamenting or remarking on the fact that as more video footage, kept coming out, how new angles were kept dropping originally. And he was just saying how, isn't it amazing that just about every single commentator sees more footage and says, aha, even more evidence that I was right, even though they're totally disagreeing with each other.
Of course, yeah.
That's crazy. And so my point was that, well, yeah, that's because this case is messy. Like, it's not just a clear cut, like if he had just walked up out of the blue and shot her in the head for no reason, I think everybody would have said, yeah, he shouldn't have done that, and he would have been arrested, and that would be the end of it. We wouldn't be talking about it. Or if she had been driving around and he was running, trying to jump out of the way, and she just kept turning the wheel to try to run him over, and then he shot her, people would have said, yeah, what the heck was she doing? She was nuts. It was more in between, such that I don't think she was trying to hit him. I think she was trying to get out of there.
I agree.
But on the other hand, I don't think that she was just dropping her friend off and was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Oh, men here, I don't know how to operate a vehicle. I'm just a woman. That's not what
she
it was
was a
member
member of an anti-ICE organized group. I mean, the whole thing was to box him in and impede what they were doing there. I think you're right. It's messy and it's a perfect Rorschach test. And as the great Scott Horton said immediately, whatever you thought your opinion of, the second you saw the headline, no amount of video evidence has ever changed anybody's mind. You came in with a side, and that's who you support. So I agree with everything you said. And me personally, I don't like these protester types, just personally, emotionally, viscerally. I don't like what they're doing. Anytime somebody glues themselves to a painting or, blocks up a highway because I want to protest this and that, I have a reflexive distaste for that. I don't like it. But on the other hand, I love to train firearms. I'm a Second Amendment guy. And that was an unjustified shooting. From my perspective, it's not even close. You could maybe say the first shot was, manslaughter level, but the other two were clearly murder. And the reason is that you should only pull a gun and shoot somebody in self-defense. And the remedy for her coming at him to save his life isn't shooting her. As you can see, he did shoot her, and she accelerated and crashed into a car half a block down the street. The remedy for self-preservation is to sidestep to the side, exactly what he did. So I don't think there's any justification like he was shooting her because he's mad at her and he's frustrated, and she disobeyed him. And
right, he wanted to punish her.
Yeah, he wanted to punish her.
This is what happened. Yeah.
So it's a completely unjustified shoot. I felt the same way about the Ashley Babbitt shoot on January 6th, when the Capitol police officer shot that woman in the neck when a crowd of people were sort of barging through a door. And I think most people aren't looking at it through the same lens I am. They just pick a side politically, and that's where they come down on how they feel about this issue.
Well, if I could make so I agree with everything you just said. If I could make a related point too, that I think people could say, well, we got to do something. We can't just let these ICE people come in and take these valuable members of our community and away and so on. That the way they're protesting, it's counterproductive. And just give an example. So after that, that Renee Good? Is that her name?
Yeah.
So after that one, like a couple days later, I think, another video was going around. Did you see the one with the kid that was grabbed in front of the Target?
Mm-mm.
So, ICE, there was like 5 guys all in, full gear going into a Target to grab, some, I guess they got tipped off or something that there were a bunch of illegal immigrants working at the Target or something. And the story was like, oh, this U.S. citizen was grabbed from the Target, and then they dumped him off like at a Walmart or something down the road, and he was crying, and like they had, guys with their cell phones were recording him and I'm a U.S. citizen or whatever. And so that was making the rounds, and people were like, this is crazy. This is Gestapo. The guy's a U.S. citizen and whatever. And the thing is, though, not that it justifies what they did, but the defenders were posting, we'll watch the whole video, and like from the whole time that the 5 ICE guys get out of their vehicles and they're marching towards the Target, this kid that was, maybe he was like 19 or something, or maybe 21, whatever, he's in front of them with his phone filming them walking backwards, just taunting them, swearing at them nonstop. And eventually, and he kind of gets in the one guy's face, and it's hard to see. And then the guy just tackled him, and then they just all jumped on the kid and, carted him out of there. And then I think they realized, a mile down the road that no, he's a U.S. citizen, just dumped him out. But I mean, like I said, not that what he was doing justified what happened, but on the other hand, you can see why, geez, these guys are just trying to enforce the law, and this kid's right in their face taunting them, a foot away. And then he did, like I said, I don't know if he made physical contact. Like some people were saying he took a swing. He didn't take a swing at the guy, but it was close enough and from the angle that the defenders of ICE saying he took a swing at him, I don't think they were lying. I think they genuinely believed he did because he was so aggressive, and then the ICE guy just finally snapped and tackled the kid. So anyway, I'm just saying that's a far cry. Like the the civil rights stuff and like the back in the 60s and whatever, like some of the nonviolent guys, they would have training sessions. I've said this real quickly. It was very strategic. It was not, hey, we're all going to be Ned Flanders and let's just hope it all works. No, they were extremely strategic. They would have training sessions. Like they would do sit-ins and stuff at like segregated lunch counters. And they would do things like, okay, you guys sit at the counter and then a ring of people will go around them. And so when the crowd comes and it's like cursing and spitting and whatever, they take the beating. And then when it gets to be too much, you tap out and you rotate. So like you go on the inside and then, you know what I mean? It's like you can take a break. And when the guys are assaulting you, you try to engage them in conversation. Just say, why are you hitting me? Because it's kind of hard to be beating up somebody who's talking to you. And like that's the stuff they would do. Yeah, because they knew the only way this is going to work is if we get public opinion on our side. If they had just shown up swearing at them, calling them a cracker or whatever, that wouldn't have worked.
Well, the modern leftists are not being trained that way, and it shows. I want to make a weird point and do a little bit of self-promotion. Because I wrote at heymannature.substack.com another article about this event, and I was trying to make the point that there's something weird about our modern culture, and it's worldwide, or at least Western civilization wide, and it is that I don't think people think they live in the real world, which is a weird claim. But in the New Year's Eve fire in Switzerland, and that club up in the Alps, 40 people died and another 100 and something or other got serious burns because the sparklers attached to the champagne that was being trotted out at midnight set the place on fire. And you can see multiple videos of the people in there as the roof is on fire, the ceiling's on fire. They're in a basement, one level down. And they just whoop and holler and pull out their phones and keep dancing and partying, going, wow, isn't this cool? And 40 of them died. And another, like I said, 100 and change seriously injured. Like they think they're LARPing or something. Like this isn't real. I'll just respawn somewhere else. And connecting it to the shooting, the woman, Renee Good, her partner or wife, I think they were married, broke into histrionics after seeing her wife get shot and killed, and was saying things like, oh my God, this was all my fault. I asked her to come down here. And then at one point, the most heartbreaking thing, she shouts at the officers and goes, why were you using real bullets? Which is like a crazy thing to say. You're up against the empire here and you think you're the rebel battalion. But you think like you're going to do these things against armed officers, and you know how evil they are, by your own perspective anyway. And you're not bringing weapons yourself. Okay, there's a reason for doing that. You can't beat the state with violence usually, but you're not doing the Gandhi thing or the Martin Luther King thing either. You're being deliberately as provocative and assholish as you can. But then when the predictable things happen, you wail about, why are you using real bullets? Are you kidding? Talk about LARPing. It's just the silliest way to approach dealing with the problem that you're like. Just take it from their side. If you're trying to fix this problem, please read more Reverend Martin Luther King. Read more Gandhi. Whatever you're doing is just the exact opposite of what you can do to bring sympathy to your side, which should be what you want, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, and there's no point in digging up names and whatever, but yeah, I've made a similar point with some of the libertarians that annoy me that like deliberately say just really offensive things and whatever, and like get in the face of cops and whatever. And I've had a similar reaction too. Like I don't think this weird tension, like in terms of your guys' rhetoric or whatever, if you actually thought they were as bad as you're saying, you wouldn't be acting like this. Mm-hmm. Like, in occupied France, you wouldn't be going up to,
you'd be doing Red
German
Dawn,
soldiers,
not whatever this is. Yeah.
And like doing, Hitler impressions or something in front of German soldiers. Like
funny German accents.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't seen that from her, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That was my my take on it, the way they were driving around and like she was saying, you drive away, like, or different ones where you see some of these protesters like, you know, blocking traffic and just like climbing up on a car or something. And just realizing like, don't you guys know, like somebody's going to snap and just run you over. Like they're just so sure. And then sometimes when like a person does kind of go through and how shocked the crowd is,
How
like,
could
oh,
they?
he's running
How
us
could they?
over. Oh, it's like, what do you think's going to happen?
We were all sitting here having tea, and he drove his car into my backyard and tried to murder me. Yeah, it's nuts. All right, sir. Are you exhausted?
I am. Really, I mean, I think people should just take our cue, and if you got problems, you just fire up your microphone and your camera, and you just do a podcast. I think that'll wrap things up.
Well, now I feel so important. All right. Thank you, Bob. This was great. Ladies and gentlemen, go to bobmurphyshow.com and see all the cool stuff Bob does there. Visit his YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Do likewise for mine. It's called Heyman Nature. As Bob reminded you, use quotes, or you're going to get 5,000 versions of a killer Michael Jackson song. And they're all great. But if you watch all 5,000, you'll never get to my little YouTube channel, which needs a like and subscribe too. Thanks again, Bob. And
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.